When we bought our house, there were several questionable design choices that we had to contend with. One of them being this stunning pink room. The ink we're talking about today could almost be a match for the paint on these walls. So why do I love it so much? Let's find out. Hello everyone, it's Addie, and today we're going to be talking about another Birmingham Pen Company ink. This ink is the best performing ink that I've seen in flex fountain pens. Nice thing about this, spoiler alert later, you can find out how you can make this yourself. Another Birmingham Pen Company ink, it is Magnolia Mirage. Looks like it has a little bit of a pink purplish hue to it. Interesting. And let's see what this does. I'm expecting some pink. Yeah, that's got some pink, and interested to see how this brownish gray dries. And it looks like it may halo because the ink splotch has purple more along the outside, and then this brownish gray in the middle. That's an interesting color because the pink is not really like a pink. It's sort of a brown toned pink as opposed to a bright pink. I need to see what that does when it dries because it's pretty different. I don't know how Birmingham Pen Company does this. I really don't. All of their inks just do something just a little bit different. Because now you can see as it dries, it's got the purple coming on in here, but it is not a sheen. This is a chroma shader. And there's some lighter pink in there. Very interesting. About the chromatography paper, there's a little bit of pink. And it fades out to a blue, but overall compared to some of the other Birmingham Pen Company inks that I've tested, the paper, this has one of the least amount of things going on, but the ink seems to have quite a bit going on. So it's deceptive. I can see this blue that's in here. I can see it reflected in some of these darker parts, and the pink, I can see the tone of the pink in here. The brownish and the orange quality that I see in here is not reflected in this. So that's interesting. Very cool. And we're gonna fill out a card. Rolodex Card. I have to refill this pen. I'm going to try to ink a pen with inks more often when I'm testing them. I'm not always going to be able to do that because it just might not work out. But I do feel like I get a more accurate experience of writing with ink if it's actually inked as opposed to dipped. Now, in a dipped pen, I'll fill out a card fine, but as far as a writing experience, I think it's better in a pen. And I filled this, but I've been playing with it. So Fountain Pen Revolution, Jaipur version 2, that is a piston filler. This is my favorite model. And I just picked up 2 more of these when they had a buy one, get one free sale recently. One thing I've noticed about this ink that is really pretty cool is that when a flex pen spreads the tines and lays down ink, it's usually a decent amount of ink, right? The thing that's odd about this ink is that when it does that, it looks raised off the page. There's no way I'm going to be able to show it on camera. More so than any other ink I've used. It is lifted up, and then when it dries, it does dry flat, but it stays very bubbled and on the line when you first write with it. It's really cool. I would love it if it stayed that way. I think a fountain pen ink that dried raised would look really cool. I know there's some gel pens that are like that, but I'm sure it would clog fountain pens up like crazy, so that's a pipe dream. I like chroma shaders a lot. This is feathering a little bit on this card, but this is cheap paper, so kind of ignore that. I like chroma shading ink a lot. I think it's really interesting, the multiple colors, and that and shading inks and inks that halo are my favorite kinds of inks. What I don't love about most chromo shaders out there is that they are either dry or they just don't perform super well in pens. I really like Troublemaker Abalone and Troublemaker Moon River, which this ink reminds me of a little bit, but not exactly the same muted tone. I like both of those inks a lot. I don't like how they write, especially in flex pens. They're dry, I get tons of railroading and skipping and just problems in general. And I found that a lot of chromo shaders are like that. This ink flows very, very well. And it's just flowing out of the pen. And again, there is some feathering on this paper, but this is this cardstock more than anything else. It's so smooth and does not railroad, does not give any problems, but yet also does not put down globs and globs and globs of ink. Let me just pause this for a second to show you what I'm talking about. So when I'm writing with a flex pen and I write fine, there is not too much ink here. This is fine. This is a good amount of ink. And even though it is fine, and it is a little bit lighter ink, even a fine point is showing really impressive shading. And that's difficult to pull off too. Then when I write in a flex style where I'm attempting to vary the line widths and I press more, it is laying down a bunch of ink, right? But it's not doing that the entire way through. It's just doing it on the flex bits. And this ink is performing exactly how I would want any ink to perform in a flex pen. And on top of that, it's chroma shader. So that is impressive. So you look, maybe you can see what I was talking about before where there's the lifted look of the line. These fine parts are still just as light and not junking ink all over the place as it was when I was writing with the fine. And the heavy parts are laying down a lot of ink, but it's not flowing outside the lines. It's staying where it's supposed to. And when this dries, you can also see some of that chromo shading. I honestly would have to say that this ink, out of any ink that I've used in a flex fountain pen like this, it's a 12 out of 10. It honestly leaves me speechless that it acts this well in a fountain pen with a flex nib. I'm in awe of that. So, enough gushing. We're starting to dry here a little bit, and you can see how this is developing shading here. This is still wet. I mean, this is a long dry time, but I expect this with a flex pen. I just filled this a few days ago. Flex pens use ink. If you have an ink accumulation problem, get yourself a couple flex pens and you'll start flying through it because they eat the ink. And it is not really bleeding through even on this Kikuyo paper. It's almost Pepto-Bismol pink, which is not maybe the most attractive pink. It does give me antique and dried flower petals, pink roses, dried rose petals. I think that people who like a muted palette would really respond to this. Calming too, in a way. It's a relaxing pink. Paper samples are the Kikuyo business paper. This is the Rhodia paper, the same one that I did the ink splotch on. This is Tomoe River paper. And this is paper from a traveler's notebook insert that I put in there just to have the off-white option. And the shading is very apparent. And some people might not like that, but I'm not one of them. I like the shading. Darker outlining around here and here. And you can see it here and around these and there and the tops. Especially on this off-white paper, maybe less so on the white papers, but it still shows. As you can also see, it is performing well. No feathering, really, to speak of in any of these. It's got to tell you something about an ink when I completely use up a piston-filled pen of the ink before I even get around to doing a review of it. I've been writing with it like crazy because it just acts so well. See, look at the outlining. I love this stuff so much. If you have a flex pen, I'm telling you, you need to really just try this out. It is so worth it. I need to fill my pen again and track down something to write in here. So I'll be back in just a second. I didn't even fill this. That was what I said I was leaving to do, but then I got distracted by something else. All right. One of the very cool things about Birmingham Pen Company, well, let's talk about some not cool things first. The not cool thing about Birmingham Pen Company, number one, there's two big ones. Number one, they do not sell samples. Now, this is bad for us because then we have to buy bottles or share samples on social media platforms or with friends, which might be a positive because sharing is nice and being social with other people is sometimes mostly a positive experience. So they don't sell samples. I completely understand why. It's a two-person company. Packaging these samples must be a huge pain in the neck because you have to get all the little bottles and you have to put the labels on the bottles and you have to fill them and you have to fill them a specific amount. And then when people order samples, they're ordering 10 of them and then you're shipping 10 samples for $4 a piece and 2 of them leak and then you send 2 more samples, on and on and on and on. It's logistically not an easy task, and I very much appreciate Ben S. and Goulet Pen Company and Yasaka Stationery and the places that do offer samples because I'm sure they make money off of it or they would not do it, but it's also got to be a pain. So that's the first bad thing about them. The second bad thing about Birmingham Pen Company is that they do not ship internationally. And I hear it a lot from people who live overseas that they are super frustrated that they can't get it. That, I think, is something, again, probably is logistically difficult with ink because of leaking and then replacing orders that get damaged. But I think that there's enough people that are interested that even if they chose extra shipping charges for packaging and the safest possible option for shipping they could find, people would pay for it. Because the ink itself, aside from being pretty amazing in the range of colors, it's inexpensive, honestly. This ink, the Magnolia Mirage, comes in a 100 milliliter bottle for $19, which is 19 cents a milliliter, which is diamine level pricing. I mean, a diamine bottle, if you get a small bottle, this is $8 and it's 30 milliliters. This, and I think the bigger bottles are less. $8 for 30 milliliters is 26 cents a milliliter. So it's cheaper than diamine. It's a lot of ink to go through, which could be a negative, but again, we can share, right? But one of the very cool things that Birmingham Pen Company does, aside from make amazing ink, is that they have formulas for some of their colors. For instance, Magnolia Mirage, I just looked at their site to get the price and to verify, is sold out, which made me cry a little bit. But the recipe for this ink is on their site. And that's actually what I'm going to write in the sample, which is why I wanted to talk about it. So Magnolia Mirage, according to Birmingham Pen Company, is 1 part airline and 15 parts of tea berry ice cream, which is this color right here. And I can see it. Don't have airline though. So I don't know any other ink company that does that. And there is a spreadsheet out there that lists all the recipes they have listed and the quantities. There are recipes for some of these inks. So I'm gonna go ahead and write that recipe here. The other good thing about them offering recipes on their site for these inks is that should tell you that they are mixable with each other without it explicitly saying that they're mixable inks. It seems that they are made in order to be easily mixed with each other. And that opens up a whole other world of possibilities above and beyond the recipes that they show on their site. I'm sure most people know that about the recipes for Birmingham, but I'm sure there's some that don't know that they do that. So let's do some swabs. Back to Q-tips. I love my Kakamori nib, but it rips up the paper a little bit much and lays down too much ink. And I try to brush, but unfortunately, this is what I like to use. Non-disposable as it might be and not aesthetically pleasing to use or to look at, I'm gonna stick with this for now. It's such a just beautiful muted pink. I mean, it could look like it could be the grossest brown in the world, and with how it works in a flex pen, I think I'd still want it. It does help that it's an extremely attractive color as well. I just don't know where that brown comes from, especially knowing the recipe. This is an ink. If I would have just looked at the site, and the sample is attractive enough. I think it looks a little brighter on their site than I'm seeing in real life. I don't think I would have been tempted to get it really at all, but I am a sucker for shading and for the halo bit, and this one does both of those quite a bit. Thought about putting an art sample on, a little skinny art sample, like draw and then some water. I'm not really sure where I would fit that in. Or maybe I could do a whole new book of those, because I need more books to keep up with. Definitely need to do that. Okay, I am back and I want to do a little, these, since these Birmingham Pen Company inks sometimes do fun things in water, I want to do a little ink drop in the water test. So if there's green in this one, I don't know what to say. I'm gonna believe that that is a magic Birmingham Pen Company additive. All right, so let's move this for a second. Make sure this is in frame. And let's do a drop of this ink in this clean water and see what happens. It does have a green in there. It does. It's dissipating now. And I don't know if you saw it, but there was just a swirl for a second of green. And yeah, now it's just the pink. Let's do one more drop, just for fun. It's just a drop. Did you guys see it? See the green in there at all? It's there. That's the Birmingham Pen Company magic stuff they stick in there. Telling you. All right, so it does some interesting things, not like some of the others. But you see how it's separating on this paper towel too. Interesting stuff. Okay. Water test on this. I'm pretty sure, especially since they specifically have a water resistant formula and this is not one of them, that this water resistance test is going to be much like the other ones and going to show that it is not very water resistant, but that's okay. It's interesting how the second layer goes on almost patchy. I wonder how it's going to dry. Because if you were into doing art with fountain pen ink, and I know many people are, that could offer some interesting texture opportunities. If this is kind of how it acts, even after it's dried, where it's very textured, even on this paper, which is cheap but quite smooth. And also, it's quite different than one layer that just dries with the chroma shading. This second layer texture. Okay, let's take care of this and see what we got here. So honestly, the water was sitting on there for at least 3 or 4 minutes, and it is not waterproof, but there is something there, which is more so than I can say for some inks. So not even going to call it water resistant, but not completely, and the amount of color that kind of spreads around is not very severe either. Water resistance, scale of 1 to 5, with 0 being not at all. It's about a 1 or a 2. Not the worst. Did not do lines on that one. Skipped it. Got the lines on the Puyo. Don't make me write with this ink more. I would hate to do that. It's so well behaved. It gets all the gold stars for behavior. Seriously. And I needed this today because let me tell you, I've had some frustrating ink experiences over the last couple days. A lot of people are talking about fountain pen burnout right now and fussing with my pens and having nothing work properly. That would cause burnout for me more than anything. And I've kind of had that going on for the past 3 days or so. So being able to relax and chat about ink, about an ink that is not fussy, is very pleasant. Needed that today. Okay, let me let this dry. I'll do one more coat over here and we'll do some final thoughts, which at this point I'm sure you already know what most of them are going to be. Okay, let's get the third coat on this bottle top here and talk about this ink a little bit. So there's no official description of the ink on the Birmingham Pen Company's website aside from the normal description of the formula, the Keystone formula, which is their basic formulation for inks. So that is why I didn't read one. Let's look at some comparisons. Let's get all the pieces here. Birmingham Pen Company, Magnolia Mirage. It is a muted, dusty pink with a little tinge of bright to it still, especially as it dries the thinner portions. It reminds me of dried flowers, rose petals. It is a chroma shading ink, so it has hues of the pink as well as a blue. You can see the colors that might pull out a muted version or a watered down version in this chromatography paper. It is a little Pepto-Bismol. I can see this being a divisive pink. I'm not sure that everybody would like it. I like it. I think that it's easy to read and that it's got a warm pink quality, soothing, relaxing, as opposed to an upbeat pink. It's more of a tea and crumpets pink and less of a Barbie convertible pink or carpet in your grandma's house. Maybe a stuffed animal from childhood pink and less headache-inducing bright, bright, bright pink. Grandma's carpet pink. That's great. Okay, so let's look at some comparisons. Now, I'm going to show you this. This is the tea berry ice cream. This is the majority of this ink. So if you follow the recipe on their site, it would call for 15 parts of this and 1 part of a blue. So it is mostly this particular ink. That blue really must make a very big difference because it knocks down a lot of the brightness of this. But it adds that moodiness and it adds, I think, legibility. This is much more legible than this. But I think you can kind of see the familial relationship between these two. The color that I have in my collection, which is smaller than a lot that are out there, the color that is closest in tone, if not shade, is Robert Oster Cherry Blossom. I feel like it has the same tone, but it is darker. So it's a darker ink, so it's more legible if you're looking for legibility. It does have some of the haloing that this does, and you can see it here, but it does not have any of the chroma shading properties that the Magnolia Mirage has. It is quite similar in tone though, so if you are not able to get the Birmingham Pen Company ink for some reason and you really like the tone and you haven't tried Cherry Blossom, I would recommend this as a close, not replacement, but close in feeling. Same tone, not the same value. Let me show you the bigger card and the writing samples from Cherry Blossom since they're fairly similar. So you can see here, even when Cherry Blossom is very thinly applied, it's the same kind of tone, just the value is slightly darker. Same with the writing. And then if we look at the chromatography paper, you can kind of see that here too, that it's got same colors, just a darker value. And the bigger writing samples, this does shade some as well. It's similar. This is darker though, definitely darker. Same tone, same feeling, same grandma's carpet. Okay. And in filing this, I will likely put the Magnolia Mirage right in front of the Cherry Blossom, which would put it right in front of Sherry Snow. And this will go here. Overall, I really love this ink. Again, it's because of, well, I do like the color. It's not my favorite color in the world because of the antique quality. And I think part of that reaction could be because of the time of the year. I think in the fall, I might respond more strongly to a more muted color like this because it's spring at the moment where I am. I feel like it's a little muted for this time of year, but the performance is just flawless. It is everything I'm looking for in a flex pen ink, and I do use a lot of flex pens. And I can see it performing very, very well in non-flex pens too. And any ink that performs this just beautifully, I want. So I want this ink at some point. I still have probably another fill in here, so we'll see how fast I use it. But I have to give this very big thumbs up. Chroma shading, low saturation, that texture that I was talking about on the additional layers, I feel like it does stay. The brown goes, but it's still splotchy and gives some texture in the color beneath. So I think that would be interesting from using the ink for an artistic project or a drawing perspective. So low saturation, very nice shading, dry time is long. Part of that is because it's a flex pen, and it does almost have that raised up thing going on when you first write with it. The flow is, I put wet because it is wetter, but it's not very wet. It's not dry and not mid. There's a recipe for it, which is great, and brownish muted pink. So that's how I feel about this ink. I think it's a good one. I am excited to use it more, and will possibly look to make it with the recipe or purchase a bottle after I use the sample up. My wish list for Birmingham Pen Company is getting quite long at this point, but that's how these things go. Thanks again for stopping by. Hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys again soon, I hope. Bye.